So getting back to how Mouse ruined comics.
Okay.
All right, 30 seconds. Your 30 seconds are up. No more boomer music.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is time for another Wednesday, another episode of the Mattriarchy. We are joined today with our usual guests, Twitless and Cartoonicus, and special guest Kelsey Shannon.
And Donal. Oh, what?
Wait, he's not here. He's not here yet. We're here today to talk about one of the most controversial books we've ever discussed on this show, which is, of course, Frank Miller's Holy Terror. And I'm going to start off. I'm going to start off with a bit of a hot take. I don't completely understand why this book is controversial.
Yeah, I agree with you because I've read Tim Vigil books that freaked me out a lot more than this one, or that were way more controversial.
So we'll get into the weeds of why I may hold that opinion.
Pigman is way worse in a lot of ways. Yeah.
Yes, but on top of that, we'll get into the thick of it. I do want to shout out the chat. Tankatron, Drake Tungsten, Fizz is here, and the Metal is watching from the wings. I don't know if you read the book or not, Metal, you're welcome to jump on if you feel like you want to. He's got the keys to the back door, so he can let himself in anytime. So, and Donald DeLay may or may not show up but who knows? Apparently, there was a family emergency. Hopefully, it is a short-lived thing. But I don't know.
Giving your thoughts and prayers there.
It's Donald. He has issues. It's just how it goes.
We don't need to talk about that. We don't talk about that. No. So first, quick thoughts. What did people think? Just real quick, like or dislike, and then we'll dig into the meat as we go. But
Twitless?
Well, nobody wants to go first.
I'll start. I wanted to partly do a panel because I felt like after I'd seen all of the conversation about this book being nothing but negativity, I felt like I was the only person on earth who saw this as being not perfect. I definitely think there's some imperfections, but I would say I think this is a distinct artistic achievement. I would go so far as to say is that this is a brilliant piece of work from an artistic perspective and what it does. And I felt like I was the only one who saw that. And I was like, I can't be the only one who sees the artistic brilliance in this. Mm-hmm. Although it took me, I think, 3 times reading it for some of that to actually sink in. I think the initial read on it, you read it the first time and it's a mess. And you read it the second time and it's still a mess. But like I said, that third time, I was like, oh, I'm really starting to see it. So
see, I don't know. That's one of my rules typically is if it takes 3 times to get through something, it's probably maybe it's not that great after all.
Yeah. Third time's a charm though, I guess.
There we go.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I'm sure we'll get into that. Cartoonicus, what are your general thoughts on the book?
My immediate thoughts are I really don't want to be here because
it's a free you don't have to be.
Because
thank you, but
I've just had a very long day and am rather tired, and I'm not in the mood to argue with anyone. And we're talking about Frank Miller.
So, do you generally dislike Frank Miller?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Good.
I
like
understand
good, yeah.
He's had some things he is good at in the past, but I have never particularly liked any of his work. That being said, he is far more a catalyst for causing arguments than anything else he's ever been. So I'm dreading this. I really am.
I've never known Frank Miller to be that divisive. I mean, I've never heard anybody really say they dislike him completely. Or even be lukewarm on him. No, I never met him, but I have favorite Frank Millers that everybody always cites Dark Knight Returns, their favorite. Right. Mine is Year One. Year One's a lot more accessible to me. It's much more like an old movie like a French Connection or something. Much more accessible to me. He tends to use a lot of really out there ideas, which are cool. And he'll, in this book particularly, he uses a lot of stuff just to almost piss you off, or gross you out, and some of that stuff gets a little heavy-handed to me. But I think he's a great stylist. I think he's really great for comics. He's one of our most important creators, if not the most that we have that I can think of, that really pushes the boundaries of this stuff. He's always trying new things. And my feelings on this book are, I think it needed another couple passes, but we can get into that. Like I found it to be almost like talking to someone who was an emotional mess. That's what it felt like. It felt like somebody who's trying to process something and doesn't have a complete handle on it yet.
What he said, I believe that is absolutely.
That is 100. Yeah.
Okay.
The background on and so what you're saying, Kelsey, is why I think it's brilliant, because it is exactly what you're saying. It is. It is a man who is angry and is working through grief and rage and deliberately wants to provoke you because of it.
Yeah.
And so he's hitting all those notes, but they're intentionally hit.
Okay, but here's the thing, Twitless. We already did the memoir stream.
This is not a memoir. This is a different kind of catharsis.
It's more of a not a memoir. This is more of a diary. Like where somebody's just pouring out their emotions in a way that, maybe nobody was meant to see this, but it, until after he died. But it came out before he died, so it's all open and bared, whole for everybody to see.
You're saying if this had come out after he died, he'd be the next Van Gogh.
Well,
he specifically mentions one of the is it Theo Van Gogh in the dedication to this book.
That's true.
Because I believe he was a victim of a he's the one who was murdered, right? Theo.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So he specifically, it's funny
in the
that
wake
you
of all the Muhammad cartoons.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. Okay.
Yep. Yeah. Metal. Hello.
Howdy.
Did you read the book?
No, I did not.
That's twice in a row now.
But I also wasn't originally planning on coming on the panel because for some reason, math in my head, I thought you were going to have 6 people on here, so I thought it would be too packed.
Yeah. No. Hutch really wants to talk about the other Holy Terror, the Batman Elseworlds book. So
where Batman is an agent of the Pope.
Yes, and we're going to do that, but not this week.
That sounds more fun.
I can't believe they would do that, but not this one.
Well,
of course,
that was
it's easy. It's easy to
before.
ridicule Catholicism and Christianity, but Islam is off the topic.
Speaking, this is a great segue. If you want to pull up the screen I've got, this is not Holy Terror, but it's only a couple of pages, and this was Frank Miller's initial attempt.
Oh yeah, I've seen this. Yeah.
This is from 9/11. Artists Respond. It was a benefit book for the first responders and such for after the terrorist attack, and it's I think 2 pages, and Frank just puts out like I think 2 or 3 panels. I'm sick of flags. I'm sick of God. I've seen the power of faith, and that's it.
Yeah,
Frank Miller, and he just has this very stark black and white imagery.
It's a very black and white opinion, in my opinion, as well.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Very, very self-contradicting opinion.
I'm sorry.
It feels like it's completely contradicting itself.
Well, I mean, it's an emotional reaction. It doesn't have to be internally consistent. That's one of the things about emotions. Which is why you should never follow your heart.
and the reason why I bring this up, the reason I wanted to show this is that this is what's I believe informing in images. There's some interviews. There's a couple clips we can take a look at before we dive into the meat of it, of the story itself. But this is kind of emotionally where Frank Miller was. So I think that's an important thing to keep in mind. One of the quotes that I was able to find before we in research for this stream. He talks about that he was, walking through the streets and, didn't know they're inhaling all that smoke, all that ash. And he said, I didn't know which of my neighbors, who of the people I knew I was inhaling. And so
that's in the book too. That's
yeah. So Frank Miller's experience of 9/11 was not just watching it on TV, and this is one of the things that really bugged me about Linkara's review of it, of Holy Terror, is he completely ignores how personal 9/11 was for Frank. All of us probably had very had a lot to process after that happened, but Frank lived in New York for a time. And
also, if you were like at the time, I was listening to Howard Stern, and Howard Stern reacted pretty much the same way as Frank in this book. They were ready to go and kill, steal, and destroy, or whatever the phrase is. They were looking for blood. So I think it's I think it's very common, especially for New Yorkers, to feel the way Frank was feeling in this book. So.
Yeah.
No matter what they say now.
Frank says that he lived here. He said something. Another thing I remember from one of the interviews about this is he said that I don't care what other people feel about how I feel about it. He said, how about if their neighborhood got blown up like mine did. You know what I mean? He was like, come and talk to me then. Come and talk to me when it was your neighbors who were vaporized and you were inhaling them. That's not just an average everyday trauma. We're talking about a generational, once in a lifetime. And, I do need to, reiterate this, because I remember I talked to someone overseas once and I said, over 3,000 people died in one day for us. He said, oh, no, it couldn't have been that high. And I went, no, dude, check it. We lost 3,000 people in one day.
No,
I believe
it was 3.
He was 30 something hundred. But that's a lot of people to lose in one day. And a bunch of whom went up in smoke.
Yeah. To give this by comparison, right? Like there was that huge earthquake in Turkey about a year and a half ago. Mm-hmm. And over the course of that, and it wasn't just Turkey, it was a huge earthquake, and it went into Syria. And I think there were 10,000 people that died from that earthquake.
Wow.
Right. But that was a natural disaster that nobody caused. Right. It is different when like the most notable thing. I mean, you look at this is something I went through a stretch of going back and watching a bunch of old movies. And you cannot find a movie set in New York City before 2001 that does not have the towers.
Yeah. Right.
Mm-hmm. It is, in fact, the towers are such an important part of the.
It was
New
in
York
the Spider-Man
skyline
trailer,
Yeah,
and it's such an important part of the New York skyline that they copied that part of the skyline in A Lonely Place of Dying as the scene in the climax where Batman faces and Nightwing face off against Two-Face. Right, like that's how important that was to New Yorkers, and like when it happened. I was a newlywed. We had just had our baby. We're coming up on our 1-year anniversary. We had just had our baby, and it was all I could do to not grab my hard hat and my hammer and head to New York and try to help get people out.
Mm-hmm.
Right? If it wasn't for the fact that it was already congested and there was already thousands of people there, I would have driven across the country and left my wife and kid behind and said, we're set up here right now. You guys stay put. I'll be back in whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Right. But, there's so many other people that were closer that
I think a lot of people felt that way. A lot of people did drive down there. Or
well, yeah. And I
don't think
I'm more than half the country away from New York. So I'm
So-
down I-80, but it's still
the final piece of this puzzle that I think is important to think about before we walk into some more discussion is the fact that the nation over because he published this I think in 2011. September 11th happened in 2001, so about a decade had passed. And so one thing to think about is the fact that the nation as a whole, after that decade, had time to, as a nation, move on, come to some different conclusions about things. However, there are people, I think Frank is one of them. There are people today.
Well, the media worked that entire decade to memory hold that whole event. Well, let's not sugarcoat this here. We have been programmed to forget about what happened there.
Let me point this out, which is the fact that even if it's fair to say, I think regardless, that for people who went through it like Frank and other people who were there's a part of them that will never get over it. Like it'll be like yesterday for them. And you can talk to people, you can hear things from a certain from that generation. And it's like, those images are burned into their minds. They're still dealing with the PTSD of it. They're still in therapy. So like, this is not something like I said, as someone who hasn't been in New York in, ages, I don't have the same level of connection to it as someone like Frank did. So I don't have the traumas that Frank did, or a bunch of other people who worked in the comic book industry, specifically centered around New York City, did. That's the important thing to.
I had a job where I had to go to. I was living in Dallas, working on G.I. Joe cartoons with this company there, and we had to fly to New York. This is like right after this, after they opened things back up, where you can fly back in, and they were having cleaning the area. And one day I asked if I could get some time off and go wander around the city, and they let me go. And it's one of the first places I went down there. Mm-hmm. And they still had buildings draped in black cloth. And it was like, so spooky. Mm-hmm. But, and everybody, like Frank says in the book, everybody was being nice, overly nice. I forget how he puts it in the book, but I felt that too. And it was pretty intense, when you see all the memorial stuff for everybody that was lost there, and just this big empty space where these two massive buildings were. It was pretty impactful. But
and correct me if I'm wrong here, but I believe that the fires didn't go out in the sub-basements for 6 months.
Yeah. When I went, there was just a giant hole that was probably 10 stories deep, or however. I still have photos of it, actually. I ought to dig them up before this is over. It was pretty crazy. But I can only imagine. I watched it like everybody else. I watched it online, or watched it on TV. And man, it was pretty shocking, and it's still shocking. Like you say, memory hold. I mean, like I haven't felt that at all. I still feel it. I still remember the day it happened. I remember getting the call, turn on your TV, watched it for days. I didn't move for days. I was just shocked.
So what I'm specifically talking about there to explain myself is actually Fizz in the chat is a good example of it. He was born after the event. And for him, it just based on his comments of it doesn't have the same impact as it does. But like, I didn't live through Pearl Harbor, but Pearl Harbor shaped my childhood.
Oh, really?
Yes. And I didn't even have family that served, but it was such an overwhelming part of growing up where we knew about it. We knew about what started World War II. That was in the movies we watched, in the books we read. It was all part of it that you couldn't not understand the gravity of Pearl Harbor. You could not understand the gravity of Veterans Day
you could almost,
but like kids today, they don't even. I mean, they do interviews with kids about why do we remember 9/11 on the streets, and they don't even know. They have no recollection of it.
Well, think about the Japanese
and why it happened. We don't even talk about it.
I mean, think about the Japanese. Their art is still permeated with the imagery of the bomb.
The nuclear,
it scarred them for generations, and it's still going. Even though they had this massive flood, which I've seen some of that permeate some of their art as well, that tsunami that happened with the Fukushima and all that. But the bomb is still ever present in their work, in their art.
The atom is huge, yeah.
So that not to compare 9/11 to that. I mean, I don't know how many people died in that, but 2 cities were eradicated. So I can only imagine that the death toll of that must have been massive for it to do that kind of generational harm. That's still felt today. So Pearl Harbor, all these events, I mean, none of them should be taken lightly, and they should all be learned from. We should not forget them.
That's an excellent segue. Let's pull up this clip here. This is very brief, but
before we get into that, I never talked about my impression of the book.
That's
Got off talking.
Oh,
so I more or less liked it. There were some places where the plot seemed like it could use some more editing.
Yeah,
it was the flow wasn't great. But did it ever nail the ending? That was a 10-point landing on the ending.
I hated the ending.
Oh man, I loved it.
And in
we'll
fact,
talk about that when we get to it.
Yeah, there are parts I do like about it.
We'll spoilers.
We'll get to
go
that
through here because there's no way to not. So,
well, somebody in the comments when I posted a link to this said my only problem was that there wasn't enough, and I kind of understand that from my point of view, meaning like the ending. I wanted more information. I wanted more catharsis. I wanted more understanding. I wanted more, and it just kind of ended in a way that had no closure.
I would submit to you that's purposeful, and that actually
it probably is. Yeah.
That I think that I think that's. But we'll get to that in a bit. Let's pull up this brief little clip. I think, and again, getting into Frank Miller's headspace, I think is very important because otherwise, this book hits. I think one of the reasons why the book has hit the way it has hit is I don't think people fully appreciate Frank Miller's headspace for it. I think people are just reacting to the plot they see on the page. They see some of the inconsistencies. They're not seeing what you start to see when you dig into some of these interviews. And so this is a very brief clip that I think helps get into a little bit of that. All righty. I actually have to play, don't I?
Yeah, I think you do.
So there we were working on DK2 as we kept saying, no, Dark Knight Strikes Again, but we gave up after a while. So DK2, the hell with it. It's DK2. And we were working on it, and we'll get to him eventually. We're working on it, and he had just finished the second issue, correct? I think it was, it was the second.
Yeah.
And something very horrible happened downtown, and it was not a very good day, and there were some very, very odd moments in the book. A lot of people think that the second issue was informed by what happened. It was not. There was an amazing scene that Frank had where Batman flew his bat plane into Lex Luthor's headquarters, crashed into it, and then sat at his control desk with his feet up and go, striking terror, best part of the job. And we all went, but the reason why I bring it up is because while we were in that process of putting that book together, that horrible day happened, and very soon after, I got another call going, you want to go for another ride? I was like, sure, I'm in, let's go.
It was actually originally called Holy Terror Batman as a parody of the way Robin always talked to Batman on the TV show. As I worked on it, it changed shape. It changed shape immeasurably, and the stakes became higher. Within the story, the intensity of the conflict became more focused, and I realized this was not a Batman story. Batman fights the Joker. Batman fights the Riddler. Batman fights much more containable enemies than Al-Qaeda. And I wanted to stay with my screed against Al-Qaeda. And so I renamed the book and reformulated the character and reworked the entire story.
which is a
and
smart
you
play.
Also, this morning, told me that you found your original kind of treatise on the project.
Yeah.
And I think the expression was, I had to use oven mitts to pick it up.
Yeah.
Because it was very fresh at the time.
I'd like to read that version.
Because what I originally wrote as the outline for Holy Terror was unrestrained. It in fact kind of caught fire as soon as you looked at it. It was pretty rough stuff, but working from that emotional core, I feel I was able to construct something that was really worth doing.
And for me, one of the odd things that happened back then, when you had first talked to me about it, and maybe another year later it became a public, you had an interview, and once it got out there, everybody was saying, well, gee, it's going to take him 2 years to do this book, which would have made it, what, 2007?
Yeah, something like that. Well,
and literally we heard all over the place, oh, by then, that whole terrorism thing is just going to be passé. Hi, here we are. I mean, you got any apologies from people telling you that you were going to be behind the curve, and here we are 10 years later? And
yeah, I'm not hearing from a lot of people telling me that they aren't afraid of trouble from abroad and homegrown trouble. The issue here is a method of killing. It's not a religion. I, for instance, was born Catholic, and I can tell you very little about the mysteries of Catholicism, but I can tell you a fair amount about the Spanish Inquisition. And by the same token, I can tell you squat about Islam. I don't know anything about it, but I know a goddamn lot about Al Qaeda, and I want them all to burn in hell.
Dang.
Okay, so that ending, I think, is really kind of what ties it home, which is, this is not meant to be a heavily researched, I looked up all the passages in the Quran and I've done my homework theology. This is a purely emotional response to a purely emotional event that he has direct relationship to. And I think that is a very important thing to keep in mind when one interprets Holy Terror.
Well, it's not about Islam. I mean, Islam is rarely spoken about in the book. It talks a lot about Al Qaeda and terrorism. There's only I heard somebody, who was it? It was John's Longbox, said he did a thing about it on his show, and somebody wrote a comment calling him or saying that, that's the racist book. And I'm like, there's only one incident of racism in this book towards anybody from that part of the world, and that's from one character who's like a Scottish guy or something, and he's a real piece of work, and nobody likes him in the book. He's a real despicable character. Yeah, exactly. So this is not, and in fact, when you start reading the book, to me it read like an indictment of everything, not just Islam, of the city, of our grasp for power and all this other things. Even though he doesn't get into great detail about it.
Frank has no love for the American government.
Yeah, right. So I think,
and one of the things I thought was what I really loved about it was as much as I could love about this part of it, because it felt kind of on the nose in some places, but the fact that he has equal as amount of disrespect for George Bush as he does for Barack Obama, which
is based.
It is, but he's later. We can touch on this in a second. They have there's as of 2018, they did an interview, The Guardian, and they've been trying to memory hole Holy Terror. specifically.
Hmm.
And so their current narrative right now, actually, since we're talking about it, I might as well share this real fast. This is a very important. You want to see some media manipulation? Take a look at this. This is The Guardian from 2018. Let me zoom in a bit so you can see it better. Frank Miller, I wasn't thinking clearly when I said those things. And that's the narrative. Now, here's the thing. When he says this, he's not referring to Holy Terror. And yet they kind of want to imply that this is kind of Frank Miller is sorry he did Holy Terror. But if you actually read his exact words on Holy Terror, he basically says this. And this is an interview that's clearly been clipped. Like they don't have like the full transcript. So again, it's very well curated because they want to rehabilitate Frank Miller enough because he's too much of an institution. My stuff always represents what I'm going through. Whenever I look at any of my work, I can feel what my mindset was, and I remember who I was with at the time. When I look at Holy Terror, which I really don't do all that often, I can really feel the anger ripple out of the pages. There are places where it is bloodthirsty beyond belief. Does he have any regrets? I don't want to go back and start erasing books I did. I don't want to wipe out chapters of my own biography, but I'm not capable of that book again. Notice he's very careful about how he words this. Now, when he said I wasn't thinking clearly, it has to do with him when he kind of went off on Occupy Wall Street. When he kind of went off on them, he had a little diatribe where he called them all like bums and he went off on a tear on Occupy Wall Street.
Yeah, but that is accurate.
Yeah, he was
an accurate statement. They a bunch of trust fund babies that went out on a rape and camping spree.
That's a very Frank Miller point of view as well.
but the I wasn't thinking clearly is in reference to that. It has no reference to Holy Terror. So there are some people,
and that's fine. That's fine.
Well, and nobody was thinking clearly.
Pretty clear-headed to me. I'm just saying.
Sure. I'm just pointing out that there are some people who have like if you go to his Wikipedia page, like they try to cite this as like, oh, Frank Miller regrets Holy Terror. Like that is a narrative that is starting to be they're planting the seeds on that one.
There are times when, I mean, yes, he is very clear. I can recall times where I was furious, and I was eloquent and precise and very pointed in the things that I had to say in that moment of just rage, and I put it out there. You know what I'm saying? And it is what it is. You know, that was that moment in time. Do I feel that way now, given some perspective? No. You know, or my ideas in those moments have maybe changed or amended, or, you know, I have more growth in that realm. So it's like, it's very clear in what he said and what he means. There's no ambiguity in this book very much. But it was for a particular moment. You know, in his trying to, you know, communicate that rage, you know, as an artist, that's what he does. That's what artists do or should do. You know, it's like, how do you deal with it? He could grab a gun and go on a massive shooting spree, or he could make a piece of art to exercise those demons, you know?
I think from the very beginning, speaking of what you're talking about, exercising those demons, it's very clear from the get-go here. The smudged, like he is basically bleeding ink on the page. And if again, this book is meant to be taken symbolically. He's bleeding ink on the page because his heart is bleeding and because New York City bled. So like this book is bleeding. It is a bleeding book. It's a book that's meant to stand out. People have pointed out, actually, Kelsey, since you have a hard copy, do you mind holding up your hard copy?
Oh, no, I don't have a hard copy.
Oh, you don't? Oh, okay, sorry.
No. I wish I did, honestly. I might buy it.
I think no, it's on my list as well. But the important thing to point out is there have been some people who point out the fact that the book's dimensions, the physical dimensions of the book, are it refuses to hide itself on the shelf. It's a long rectangular book, so when you stick it on your shelf, it actually sticks out like 4 inches from your rest of your library.
Is it not the same size as the 300 books?
Yes, I think it has similar dimensions.
Okay.
But for this book in particular, people have talked about wanting to hide it on their shelves, and they actually have, like Linkara, for example, he was griping that he couldn't hide the book. It stuck out obnoxiously.
What a wuss.
Look, hey, there's a question in the chat since we're getting to the first pages here. Yeah. I didn't want to go too far with this because I was curious about this myself, but the I don't know how you say your name, Fishozo corner. Well, why did he open with a fake Muhammad quote?
Mm-hmm.
And do you have that? I don't know if you have that clip,
right.
but it's
right
if you meet the infidel, kill the infidel, attributed to Muhammad. I was curious about that quote myself. Is that an actual quote? Do we know? Do you have any information?
It's not. It's not a direct. It's not a direct quote. It's more of Frank Miller's like his interpretation of the sentiment of what he interprets from certain passages and screeds from terrorists, essentially.
Yeah, this is the fanatic talking.
Yeah,
you know.
Yeah. Well,
right?
in chapter 3 of the Quran, it does say to fight the infidel wherever you find them, and until they find themselves willfully submitted and humiliated to pay the jizya. So,
but through years and years of indoctrination into these crazy systems.
Whether you want it to be a say, oh, it's a fake quote, or it's it is a what do you call that?
A reinterpretation.
It's a
paraphrase
of the 3rd chapter of the Quran. So.
It's an emotional paraphrase. It's very important to point out this is an emotional paraphrase. It's not accurate. You'll notice that he doesn't put the surah or anything like underneath that.
Right.
This is an emotional quote.
It's kind of like when critics of Christianity misquote the Bible, or not necessarily misquote it, but they're not taking what the actual meaning is.
The entirety of chapter 3 is the final marching orders for Islam, and it does include like bringing the entire world under submission. So it is the source of the most violent verses.
Well, doesn't Islam mean submit?
Yeah,
it's in the name.
Yep.
So it's part.
Oh wow!
And Muslim means one who submits or slave. So, I mean that's a loose interpretation. But yeah.
Submission, at least we'll go with submission is very important. I mean they submit themselves 3 times a day, right? 5? How many times?
5.
5. Yeah, it's 5 times.
Yeah, prayer 5 times a day.
So like submission is a very important aspect of the religion. Getting into the comic, it's very clear from these early pages that look at those ink blots. Like these are not another artist. You could say that's sloppy. This is sloppy. It's sloppy with a purpose.
See, I interpreted it as, even kind of the way he talks about it. It feels dirty. It feels like even the characters, when they start showing up, they just feel filthy. And like, I know it's supposed to be raining, but it doesn't feel like it. It just feels like piss and just grossness. I don't know. Everything just feels filthy to me in this whole book. And I mean, I agree with you in the sense that this is just coming straight out of his soul. His soul was black. He's bleeding on these pages.
Yeah. I also, one of the things I found really interesting artistically is I don't think there's a right angle in this entire work. As far as a square, everything is askew, everything is askance.
That's interesting. I want to keep an eye on that.
He's doing the German expressionism thing.
Yeah,
I think that's part of it. And I mean, it also makes all of the parts of the city, even before the explosion, look worn and haggard, right? And it's the idea that how much is the fixer actually fixing? How much is the fixer actually?
That's because this is all not Batman.
So we can actually address that now, because we have clearly not Catwoman, just remove the cat ears, and then we have the fixer, who is clearly just Batman with also the ears removed.
Not Batman, yeah.
And a gun.
But I want to point out something. This is another idiot thing that Linkara did. Is Linkara was like, well, comics are supposed to read left to right. And I was like, and this made me livid, because how can you look at 2 or 3 of these pages and not see what Frank Miller is attempting to do with how he has constructed the reading order? He has the left tier and he has the right tier. What do those 2 things look like?
Oh, clever. I didn't even think about that. Is that the same way throughout the whole book?
Not the whole book, but for several pages, he does. Again, keep looking. Look at the pattern there. He is doing, and again, vertical reading order. You're supposed to read top to bottom and then top to bottom. These
Well,
are these are
I read it-
towers.
I mean, I had the benefit, I guess, of reading it digitally, so I was only given one page at a time. So I had no choice
Okay.
but to read it vertically.
Yeah. These are two, he literally has pages, these bleeding pages of 2 towers. And he does it for several pages. And again, how can you know? I mean, this is so.
So that's lost all meaning digitally, unless it's
Yeah, I hadn't
double
picked
page.
up on that either, and I actually thought they might have been 2-page spreads.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I'm gonna say credit for creativity, but you can't possibly say that it should be obvious to anybody because you just had to explain that to every
Well, no.
single one of us.
yeah, I mean, the thing is the reading
It should
order
be
is
obvious too
simple
if you're gonna
understand.
claim to be a critic. I guess.
When to rain on Linkara's parade, even though I thought these were 2-page spreads, the reading order was never a problem because Frank is using the white space, the gutters, in a way that actually should direct your eye.
Also, there are right angles there.
Yeah, well, on the corner, right? You're right. Correct. I stand corrected. The panels are right angles at least.
The camera angle is very skewed throughout. That's a good.
So-
good point there.
I was talking about the drawings, not the panels, but fine.
So Fizz was saying, I'm gonna just call you
You're talking
Fizz.
about
Fizz
these using
Chozo.
Dutch angles.
Saying some reason
Everyone
Frank
calls him Fizz,
uses
it's all right.
uses Batman as a self-insert. Garth Ennis does with the same with the Punisher. I mean, anybody that says they're not doing a self-insert is, maybe lying to themselves. I'm in every character in every piece of everything I do. Of course, this of all works is a self-insert.
Yeah.
Well, and I think it's a little more complex than that, to be perfectly honest, too, because like Frank isn't thinking that Frank is going to, climb up on top of a rooftop with not Catwoman. Right?
No, but he'd like to, right? I mean, that's the whole point of
It's a fantasy. No, it's a fantasy.
I think that Fixer is more than just a self-insert. He is
that's his id.
Well, if I may,
Mm-hmm.
I've always felt that Batman is more of a self-insert than anything else. In that, Frank has these really weird ideas about Batman's character, and it always feels like he's up on a soapbox telling the rest of us, no, you're doing Batman wrong. This is how Batman should be done.
No, I don't.
He's your old fart, grandpa,
right? So
who's
Fixer,
like, you kids suck. Here's how you really should
Fixer
do it.
is him just finally getting to actually do that without DC breathing down his neck.
That's an important distinction to make, though, because there were some people who
that's even accurate. I think you're projecting that on it.
But let me make this point. Let me give this point to Cartoonicus a bit. Okay. There are a lot of people who treat Holy Terror as if Fixer is one-to-one Batman, and I do have to point out the fact that even though it's very clearly that we're meant to read it as such, Fixer is in fact a different character. And it's important to make that distinction clear because if Frank had written a Batman story and it was this, I probably would have a negative reaction because it would be like, hey, you're taking a canonical thing and you're sullying it with your id here. And some people may be able to accuse that of Frank's other works. What I'm saying is that I'm actually glad. One of the reasons why I appreciate Holy Terror is the fact that Frank put the extra distance and said, okay, this isn't a Batman story, although I'm clearly projecting my version of Batman onto it.
Well, when he said that in the interview, I was actually very appreciative of that because that's a large part of my criticism with the things that they do with him today. It's like, that's what you're trying to do to him. You're pushing him too far. He should be, like he said, fighting the Joker. These things that, if you got something really honest and serious to say, then you really shouldn't be futzing with these make-believe goofy characters. Then you need to go and take it seriously. And I think that's in a weird way, that's what he did, even though it's still a silly comic book where the guy has handcuffs that he throws out to grapple onto stuff. That's hilarious. I actually love that bit, but it's totally silly. So, I mean, I guess that goes counter to what I just said, but maybe that's just
the way
his art interprets it, I guess.
it comes down to the idea that like Frank was in the same position voluntarily that Alan Moore was by force, right? Where he didn't go out and break somebody else's toys, right? Alan Moore with Watchmen set out to break everyone's toys, and then DC said, "No, you can't do that." And Watchmen was better because he was not allowed to break other people's toys. Frank took a look at this and he's like, "Nah, this can't be a Batman story because I have something to say about terrorism, and I can't say that inside of a world where fishnet beclad magicians can backwards speak reality."
Well,
right?
That's what he says. Are we sure he's not just making excuses after DC pulled the plug on him?
No, because I don't think. Well, first of all, DC didn't pull the plug on him. This is one thing. Somebody said in the chat that Legendary put this out, and that seems weird. It's not really that weird. Legendary is Warner Brothers' house for things that Warner Brothers doesn't want to put the Warner Brothers name on. So DC contracted with him to make this book. DC paid him, and they published it under Legendary, so it wouldn't have the DC name on it.
Oh,
It's
that's
all
right.
It's like Touchstone Pictures was for Disney back in the 90s.
But
they do the King Kong stuff.
If Disney wanted to do a story that had like nudity in it, they couldn't put it on the Disney name, so they would just publish it under Touchstone, and nobody.
I thought they did. I thought it was Miramax. The Disney was Miramax. Was there?
Yeah,
they may have done multiples. But here's the thing.
Miramax was Weinstein's company.
Warren Beatty's Dick Tracy was originally supposed to be a Disney picture, and then they gave the boot over to Touchstone so that they could have Madonna nude.
I'm gonna go back briefly to Kelsey's point earlier. One thing that's going on here is you have a man who's very hurt, very damaged, and comic book artists in New York City, and you see this in a lot of post 9/11 superhero works. They had to work through that trauma, and it's kind of a shame how much trauma ended up getting into superhero books as a result. It's a separate conversation, but here you have a man who's maybe not only, but one of his main ways of making sense of reality is through these aspirational superhero stories. And so he's speaking his trauma through a superhero story because that's what he knows. That's been his bread and butter and his language for decades at this point. And so when he's processing and working through that trauma, it comes out, as Kelsey, as you were saying, through the language of a goofy superhero story.
Yeah.
And because of that, you get these contradictions, and that's part of what it's purposeful in a way.
Well, like I keep going to Fizz Chozo. He's got some good questions, things about Frank in the self-insert thing and how Batman was a psycho, deranged Batman in the All-Star Batman and Robin and this, and it's like, is this a look at like the real Frank Miller? And I keep thinking about my own writing now and having to develop these various characters. And I find that even in the smallest role, these are characters that represent parts of myself that I don't really get to express in the open. I feel very reserved generally for various reasons. I try to present myself in a certain way, but there's all kinds of emotions running under the surface, like a Vulcan, where I got my angers, my rages, my passions, and all these things, and these get represented in the various characters that I'm illustrating. And in some cases, I'm even reserved in that. And I think that with an artist like Frank, someone that gets recognized at a really high level, especially some of the great literary minds that we've had in our times, these are people that are more honest about what's going on in their own spirit and mind than you or I could ever be.
So R. Crumb, and I think this is actually a better example of what R. Crumb talks about, because R. Crumb talks about the fact that he's got this creepy id, and that when he draws his comics, he's kind of he's trying to kind of
make sense of these things, these thoughts in his head.
My problem with Crumb is that Crumb just keeps being more degenerate. Like he just there's no end. There's no point where he goes, I finally exorcised the demon. I am now more normal. there's just
Maybe.
another more of him staring creepily at women's butts.
He's staring too deep into the abyss.
Yeah.
What you are is what you feed yourself with.
But Frank,
yeah.
Frank actually did it. Frank purges and has the catharsis. He purges these dark thoughts and even bigoted ones. He purges them on the page, and then afterwards is able to look back and say, that's in my past now. I don't feel the same way as I did.
That's not a work I could do again. You know,
it's not a work I could do again.
Yeah.
And so I would argue that Frank is actually doing better than what R. Crumb is pretending to do. When
the bar is not very high.
I'm just
R. Crumb is merely indulging his excesses instead of actually trying to understand them and grow from them, right?
Exactly. Yeah, that's my take on Crumb. You know, like his wife is still taking creepy photos of women to show him later. I'm serious.
No, it's true. That's true. That's a fact.
That's funny.
Jim Tuner says
with a comment that endlessly intrigues me, because I have not read a lot of late Steve Ditko, and now I feel like I must.
Frank Miller is channeling the same weird spirit that inspired Ditko in later years. I mean, is that the tough guy thing? Is that Ditko? Oh, Ditko. I'm thinking of Steranko. Never mind.
I don't know anything about
That's a totally different person.
If I may make a guess.
I get it now. Yes, from Ditko.
He was talking about Mr. A, right? Is that what you're talking about, Jim?
Well, yeah, he was really hardcore into that selfosophy stuff, right? The Ayn Rand and that whole thing.
He was an objectivist.
Angry right-wing vigilante politics, specifically. Oh, I think that's probably a part of it, at least with the idea that we're looking at here a specific inciting event. It's a focused anger in this piece, not a generalized anger.
Well, it occurs to me that for our audience, we should give a brief overview. There's not a lot of story here, actually, but it is important to give a brief overview. So we have our not Catwoman, Natalie Stack.
I must interrupt for a moment to point out the perfectness. I never would have imagined it, but FUD as a sound effect.
Yeah, it's good. FUD.
There's something off about the Foley in this book as well. Like everything is a little askant. Like he's using like gross onomatopoeia. He's not using the typical pows and like superhero language. It's more guttural. It's meant to hit wrong because the violence. Yeah, it's like the conch. It's like these are different. Some of these
I prefer these.
I'm just saying, like I think it fits the theme. But the brief, if I can just give a brief summary for the audience.
Go for it.
So we have Natalie Stack. She's our Catwoman. We have the Fixer. We have Catwoman and Batman, but totally not. And they're doing their usual, he likes me not kind of tete-a-tete that's filled with violence. But then what ends up happening is their tete-a-tete gets interrupted by a terrorist attack. And then they get swept up into even more terrorist attacks that basically are going to plague Empire City in something that clearly mirrors 9/11 in some respects. And then Fixer and Natalie go on a crusade of vengeance, a brutal crusade of vengeance against the Al-Qaeda. It's specifically mentioned that it's Al-Qaeda, but it's an imaginative fantasy Al-Qaeda. It's not like realistic. They don't have it's not meant to evoke the real Al-Qaeda. It's just, again, a very emotional fantasy of here's the villain terrorists. So that's the basic plot. There's not a lot more to it than that. The rest of it is just kind of diving into the emotional tones of that experience.
Yeah, and instead of one of the things that I found most intriguing in terms of construction in the story, as comparing it to 9/11, was instead of being, the planes, instead of being those singular, basically unpreventable moments that those were. Here there are a series of bombs that are going off. And there are a massive series of bombs. There are a series of bombs. And so then you suddenly have smaller events that could potentially be stopped or interrupted. And that's one thing that separates this event and falls it makes it fall more within the realm of the superhero comic framework.
When it's also like really gritty and visceral, because it's all like nails and razor blades, and it's so tangible and street level. It's not so high concept like nuclear bombs or something like that. I mean, this is nails and going into you, into your leg and things like that. It's really crazy intense.
What do you guys think, Kelsey? What do you think of his decision to kind of highlight? Because he uses it's all black and white except for the little highlights of either green or red that he sprinkles it through. What did you think of that artistic choice?
Well, I didn't understand the significance of making her sneakers red. I didn't understand and later there's like what appears to be a giant shoe that's red in the rubble, because there's like a tiny car next to it. That's why I was confused about that. But the purple, I didn't know about that, like the pink or whatever. Yeah. I think they only use that. Is that the same color as the very end? Because they start using a whole color on the page, I think, right?
I think the only colors we see are red, pink, and green.
I love this. I love the green eyes.
Blue. There's a little bit of blue because the Star of David guy gets a blue.
Oh, right. You're right.
I love the green eyes, especially for one particular thing when she's going in disguise as a woman in the burqa, and you can only see her eyes. It immediately identified her as that character. But the idea that of the red shoes, I don't really understand what that's for.
The colors have to mean something, but I have gone through this twice, and I cannot for the life of me figure it out.
Apart from meaning, I was just thinking from an aesthetic point. I think the colors help avoid your eyes getting too tired on the page. I think
in that regard, on a technical level, I think that I appreciate.
Yeah, but there are very specific things that are colored, right?
Right.
Like bottoms of shoes, and it's like, huh?
The shoes, the eyes.
What are you trying to say here?
Except for the very end when it's like all just solid colors.
I do think that the red shoes, like, let's look at this page here. Although it may not be, again, you got to go with the sort of emotional tone here. The page is bleeding in black and white ink, but the red also evokes blood. So the page, like, again, even though it's just her shoes, but bear with me, if we take this again more symbolically, Frank is programming our brains to think, blood. These page and so I think that the coloring on her shoes is just that supposed to be that just subtle hint of
Well, if that's the case, I mean, I could, because in this piece right here, my eye starts at that razor blade, and then it starts at that razor blade, and then it goes to her shoe, and then I have to kind of decipher the rest of the image. Like, what are they doing? He's upside down.
The other thing that I found really weird structurally about the whole book, is how much time is spent focused on the bottoms of feet.
Maybe he's like Tarantino.
I don't know. There are a lot of the bottoms of feet in it, and honestly, even in you wouldn't necessarily see that much of it. But they're like, you've got these.
He's flexing on Rob Liefeld is what he's doing.
I don't know.
I just assumed it's because
page we're looking at right here.
The
right?
shoes are roughly tower shaped in themselves, and they're often just two of them on the
shoe. It could be something like that, but it's also like you've got that actual visual trick on here where, no matter where you hold the book, you're looking at the very bottoms of these feet, right? Where it's got that the way that fades away, like the robber's guns or Mr. or Uncle Sam's finger.
Megatron's got a good interpretation. He says, "Walking through the blood of the innocent."
Could be.
Here's the thing.
Yeah, but she's got it before the explosions as well.
I've noticed in a lot of other Frank Miller stuff, he often is showing the bottom of boots and stuff, and I think he just likes drawing the treads.
Yeah.
It could be that.
It could be that simple.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It just struck me as all.
And I think the coloring.
Sometimes a cigar is just a cigar.
That's still the question, right? Why are her feet colored and not his? Right? What is the symbolic difference here?
I mean, sometimes when I'm doing things artistically, I'll just do it because I like it. Yeah. And let people make sense of it another time. I mean, it could be that simple as well.
I think if he had colored Fixer's feet as well, it would distract from the page more than enhance it. I think some of it is just technical. That's kind of what I was digging into.
Red is offensive to Muslims.
I think maybe just the bottom of the foot. Is that?
Oh, interesting.
It could be. It could be.
But if
that is kind of a Frank Miller trademark, though. He does do that a lot.
Right. And if that was the case, he would make every foot red.
Right, really rub it in. Yeah, I thought her leg came off right here. I was like, "Oh my god!"
First time I read it, I was like,
"All right." So I want to talk briefly about probably one of the best sequences in the entire book. It's actually kind of what influenced us to do this stream, which is after the explosions happen, we get to see a sequence like this. So what happens, there's something that goes on here regarding the concept of objectification. And I want to show two examples of it. First example is here. At the top left, we have, I think, Amina. And she is a suicide bomber.
This was a good scene because I didn't understand at first who was it going to be. I knew he was kind of getting at that, but I was looking how he portrays the other character coming into the scene. I thought it might have been them.
Well, that's just
that's what happens when you have her come in this half silhouette and look all menacing, right?
Well,
and her lips being colored almost makes her the innocent in this in a weird way.
But get a load of this though.
Yeah.
From the concept of objectification, or we'll use the term othering, right? Where you dehumanize your enemy. You'll notice that we're seeing through her point of view, so she's humanized. And she's about to, spoiler alert, she's about to suicide bomb and blow this person up. So she sees, again, a lot of this is in silhouette. A lot of this is you're not seeing her as a person. She is simply going to be a target. Okay. And again, we see these faces. Frank Miller wants to draw every single victim of this violence and show you the people that they were in these frames. And then when we get to the explosion of the towers, he does the exact same thing, except he starts to fade them out. And then he multiplies them. They fade out to nothing, and then they multiply into panels. And then they multiply even more. And I have to call Linkara one more time, and this will be the last time tonight, but Linkara said, "Oh, after 2 pages, that was enough." And it was like, no, Linkara, it was not enough because you didn't get the point. Because the point here was the fact that thousands of people died in 9/11, and that is what Frank Miller is channeling here. It wasn't just a spread with a couple of tiers of panels. It kept going. In fact, if Frank Miller was to, in fact, accurately represent this trauma, it would have to go on for enough pages to represent all of those blank headstones. And Frank said he wanted to evoke that idea of that loss, that kind of headstone kind of an idea, that all of these people who were all in, and notice that Frank draws them all as unique individuals, okay? And then they are all erased by this act of violence. How can you not read this sequence and be unmoved by what Frank is processing? Knowing that his mindset, knowing that he lived through the trauma, knowing that he lived through the trauma, he knew people who lived through the trauma, people who he lost friends and neighbors, other people lost friends and neighbors, and he is bleeding on the page to show you how these people have been erased by terrorist violence. And this, again, like I said, I feel like if you can read this and be unmoved, you're a robot.
Or you're a light bringer sitting on top of your lofty wall.
Yeah.
This is the language of sequential comics, because in comics, and it hits even harder, right? Because in comics, we read sequentially. And by the way, these are, again, what do we have here on the left and right? We have 2 towers. So he sets up 2 towers of people and then artistically shows how they have been erased. And we read sequentially from left to right. So in theory, we're supposed to be thinking about this in terms of a sequence of events, a story, right? Every one of these people has a story that has now been cut short. That left to right has been erased. They don't get a story. They don't get an ending. They don't get closure. Comics now we get to read the trauma of comics in a very, very distinctly. I could write a thesis on this. A thesis on these blank panels. It is so, and here's the thing. I read a criticism. Someone said that Frank was being pretentious here, but you can't be pretentious if you live through it. Pretentious is someone who pretends to access something that they don't have access to. He lived this. He's still processing this. This is something that will be with him till the day he dies, and he knows people who feel the same way.
There's so many things. The chat is awesome. There's a lot of great stuff going on there. But the one what's the point? Fizz Chozo saying, what's the point of her being a lesbian, alcohol drinking Islamic terrorist? Well, I mean, he's focusing on, Al Qaeda, but my interpretation of that with her being is her being outside of Islam. These are extremists. These are like when you talk to people who are doing something for some other reason, because of their own pain or their own misguided youth. I mean, she's young. She probably got drawn into this kind of thing. There's any number of reasons. It's like when people associate Christians with being a certain thing, and I know a lot of Christians who are just Christian in name only and do things and have no understanding of what they're doing, really. And I could kind of picture her in a similar way. She's just
to add on to what you're saying. Yeah. One thing that is actually known about some of these terrorist organizations is that they specifically go to recruit people that are seen as lost and misguided souls, right? Yeah. People who are guilt-driven by their own sins, who think that they might end up like burning in hell, and they are sold that martyrdom can kind of like wipe that all away.
Pigman also points out the fact, Pigman's another much more polemic work, points out the fact that for extremists, they believe, I'm not going to get into the finer points of the theology here, but they believe, and they are led to believe, they're given permission to, because of their martyrdom, some of them feel like they can, they're given like a dispensation. It's like, oh, you're going to martyr yourself, so if you want to, you can have a kind of Rumspringa. You can kind of have a moment of being profligate because you're in the United States about to commit an act of,
Yeah, but they're looking for people who are susceptible to that in the first place, right? Like they have targets. They kind of like shadow people for a while.
So I'm pointing out the fact that again, not to get into the finer theological points, but that there are terrorists who do in fact believe and act this way.
That's the whole point of it being terrorism. This is not necessarily Islam, when you said that in Islam, because suicide is a sin, and that's why she's drinking and promiscuous. Yeah. And she's outside of Islam. These are extremists.
And most of these people aren't actually, like the people who get recruited aren't very knowledgeable about the finer points of things. Yeah. They're being sold it by someone they assume is more knowledgeable than them. Somebody who's got like a religious authority in their eyes. So if they're told that, whether it's true or not,
you saw that with the 9/11 attackers. They went on a huge binge before they went into the thing.
That's the
you
point.
Saw that at the Pulse nightclub. The guy was a regular before he went in there and started shooting. That's standard for these suicide attacks. That's standard behavior for them.
And that's who Frank's
the mass
talking
media is
about.
like, oh, these guys couldn't have been representing Muslim. Well, they maybe that's a derivation, but the standard belief amongst these folks is that their behavior is acceptable because they're in the middle, they're about to perform a jihad.
And it's important to point out. It's important to point out that Frank is specifically talking again. That's why we played that quote at the beginning of the interview, where he says, "I don't know a lot about Islam. I'm talking about Al Qaeda and what I emotionally, see from them." But okay, so back to this spread here, right? So we get the dehumanizing aspect of seeing someone in silhouette entirely, and then seeing all the regular individuals who get erased. Later on, we get to see, and this is where Frank actually demonstrates being a little bit.
There's the big shoe.
Yeah. But I wanted to show real fast where, here we go, right here. People who accuse Frank of being hateful miss this page. Because in this page, we have some silhouetted terrorists, right? So again, we're dehumanizing the enemy. But Frank doesn't let that sit. Frank is pouring forth out of his id, but he also recognizes that that's a dark thing to do. And so he all of the terrorists that have just been killed. It took me like the third reading to get this. That's why I said I had to read it 3 times. But I was like, why are we getting all of these panels of just seeing these? Oh, these are the people that he is killing right now. And Frank is humanizing them. He puts all of them as unique faces, and he rubs your face, all of our faces, including his own, and the fact that they're being killed as well. And as opposed to being dehumanizing, in this moment at least, he rehumanizes them as he's killing them. This is a very deliberate choice. It shows that this work is more complex than people assume that it is.
Now, is that to suggest that the fixer is doing the wrong thing, that he's no better than them?
I think it's meant to be. I don't think there's an easy answer for this one. I think
I'm
Frank,
not sure.
Yeah.
I think, and the fixer, even in conversation later on, he is just doing what he is doing. Yeah. There isn't necessarily, in terms of the narrative of the story, where the fixer is the good guy and these guys are the bad guys. They're all there's different levels, perhaps different levels of badness, but there's across the board badness. So I mean that's the complexity of war, right? Yeah.
So I just wanted to point out that there are people who say, "Oh, this is just a bigoted work, and he's just killing Muslims." And it's like when you look at when you look at what Frank is doing symbolically with humanizing, dehumanizing, he's cognizant of how these things operate.
Well, and I think a lot of it
purposely uncomfortable.
I think people that say it's just racist or something like that, it's like they don't know how to read comics, right? It's like they're not actually paying attention to the way the images are being used on the page.
Actually, it's kind of like that scene right before that when they blow up the helicopter. He shows all the doctors, the pilot, even the one that they're trying to help.
Right here.
Yeah.
Yep, exactly. So this is a pattern. Frank is trying to humanize victims. He's trying to show you in these frames that these were people. And so if Frank was purely dehumanizing his enemies, he would not do the same thing he does here, which is to humanize and show all their portraits, to show them as people. And it's important because back in that image, he doesn't show them as because what he could have done, he could have made them all angry monsters. That could have been easy. It would have been very easy, but he draws them just in the same amount. I would say he draws them more respectfully in some ways than he draws other
these
characters.
are actual people, right? Because later in the book, he gets way more specific about the images, the people that he's showing, like Pelosi and stuff, you know?
Yeah, I mean, then there are some pages, even above here, there's a page where you've got, I can't remember who all it is.
Here you go. You've got it's very clear. You have George Bush, I think. You have Michael Moore, Dick Cheney.
Yep.
You've got.
I love how friggin' smug and unattractive Michael Moore looks there. So, just side note.
I think that's Condi Rice.
Condi Rice, yeah.
That's Al Gore. There's clearly some of the Death to America people, I think, at that point.
I think that's Sharon.
Ariel Sharon on the left?
Okay, so.
That makes sense.
So
later on, Hillary Clinton, Barack, and Joe Biden all show up. So he's showing one of the things he does in this comic, and this is a technique he kind of developed during The Dark Knight Returns, was to show the influx of media images. Just the fact that, to kind of convey the idea, the media assault, the channel flipping of just seeing just an endless row of images and faces and opinions. And so some of these pages seem kind of abstract because it's like, oh, why are we jumping from the terrorist attack to just like all of these images with no text? And what you're supposed to kind of do with this sequence is just kind of read if you were flipping through the channels and you weren't necessarily pausing enough to read or hear, you were just channel flipping, channel surfing. This is kind of a bunch of a montage of what you might see. This is the TV effect of early, 2000s of just, seeing just reactions and violence and anger and, just
like the movie theater with the Transformers on the screen, like it's just violence. And then it cuts to, these people throwing rocks at a head, and then it cuts to like a toy dinosaur in a coffee cup. It's like he's juxtaposing the kind of make believe violence that we have, that we consume daily with the real violence, you know.
Can anyone explain why that dinosaur comes back later?
Like what?
So I noticed that toy dinosaur, and then later on near the very end, there's some kind of action scene. I can't remember what it is, and bam, there's a Tyrannosaur in the back. I have to assume they're connected.
I don't know if that was because when they're going into that area, they talk about going into a deep, old part of the city that had all this symbolism carved into it by madmen or possible madmen, you know. And yeah, I think that was kind of like a wall fixture or a gargoyle, but it just, I don't know. It looked like a T-Rex. I'll have to look at that again.
This is the image with the giant shoe on it, and I think the perspective is kind of warped. I think we're supposed to be seeing the shoe in the foreground, right. And yeah. But it's such a sloppy kind of mess on the page that it just looks like a giant shoe.
Again, I mean, when I'm like, where does that fall here? Hang on, because throughout this whole thing, we got the shoe on our cat girl,
right?
Yeah,
and then
red.
Where the hell is that? Oh, here it is. Okay, so it's after that. We're seeing all. We don't see any more red for a long time, actually. After that, we're going through that whole montage. We're meeting the cops. And then we catch back up with them in the city, and it's her feet again. So, I mean, it's interesting. I don't know what it means, but
I did. Linkar did
water. It's a lot of pink.
It has been pointed out that the car looks like the car from Action Comics #1, which I think is deliberate. Because again,
I'm in the same vein with Linkar, in that until he said something, I had no idea what I was looking at.
I think the car is deliberate. I think again, I got someone who's working through and using the tropes. Because again, this is just he's using superhero tropes to explore his id regarding 9/11, and so that car shows up because it's the Action Comics car.
Okay, here's the thing, though.
Well, that's a deep cut.
Once again,
yeah, I hadn't picked up on it either.
Yeah, I didn't either.
We've got red and green, right? Every time you see the red shoes, that's on. Sorry, what's her name?
Natalie.
Who has green eyes.
Yeah, it could be foreshadowing something, but
wait a minute, is this a country's flag?
Red,
what's
white,
red, white, and green?
Green.
Oh, lots.
Italy. I mean, what?
There's a lot of Middle Eastern countries. I think that
red, white, and green.
Paraguay.
Isn't Palestine's red, white, and green?
Palestine's we have red, white, and black and green.
Okay. At the time,
we have red, white, black, and green.
That's
on the
what
page.
that is. Yeah.
But why would that be on Natalie?
Again, we might be reading too deeply into it.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I think probably it's just to break it up there.
Bulgaria's red, white, and green.
I think the colors on this page are probably so it doesn't just muddy the whole work.
That's true.
Right,
yeah. Otherwise, it'd be utterly indecipherable.
I mean, you wouldn't see the shoe if it wasn't outlined. You wouldn't see the car if it wasn't green. That's how.
Yeah, there's other cars in that mess.
Every
I'll be right
Afghanistan
back.
flag is also red, green, black, and white.
Which one?
I don't think he's
every Afghanistan flag. I don't think he's harboring that at all. I'm just saying that those are the colors.
I think it's mostly that this page would be an indecipherable mess. It's only just above an indecipherable. But I want to defend the indecipherable mess for just a second and say that
plus red and green are complementary colors, so they stand out even more from each other.
The fact that
makes it look like Christmas. I mean,
the fact that the comic reads as an indecipherable mess a couple of times reinforces the thematics here, because it was 9/11. The city became an indecipherable mess for a bit, and if he were to clean it up, it would actually do a disservice to what these people went through, in a way. In Frank's mind, I think he had to make it a mess so that he could channel what that raw emotion is like. And I think that's one of the strengths of Frank Miller as an artist. By the way, I find a lot of Frank's work as he goes on to be ugly, but in this context, it's ugliness for an ugly subject. And I think it fits like a glove. I think that Frank's work, which sometimes I go, wow, why are we doing this ugliness here? It perfectly fits when you're talking about your trauma, a shared trauma for 9/11. I feel like I said, if you were to make it prettier, I think it would actually work against what you're doing.
Yeah, can you imagine if this was like drawn by Alex Ross? You know, like how dramatically different that would be.
I mean, I'm not trying to throw shade at Ross or anything, but it would be soulless. There'd be, yeah. Ross's standard stuff is not. I mean, his typical painted stuff it wouldn't.
I mean, this is what kind of art would you call this? Not representational. That would be Alex Ross would be.
Yeah.
This is what would you call this? What do they call that when it's not abstract or it's you're?
I don't know.
You're giving the feeling of it rather than the
expressionistic.
Yeah, this is expressionist. Yeah. This is an expressionist view of his trauma, basically.
It's almost cubist. I guess I feel like if he went a little further, it would be he'd be in Picasso's cubism. I think he's just writing that line. Like when you look at his grasp of anatomy on some of these pages, it's like I feel like he's angling towards that. And he's just I feel like if he went any further, we'd be in Guernica. You know what I mean? Where it's just purely perspective abolishing.
This feels like, you know when you see like Spielberg pre and post Schindler's List. Mm-hmm. Those are two different artists. They're dramatically different. And I think that in this case it happened so much later, but like this definitely changed him because like all his stuff. I don't know. I can't think of anything he's done since that is really, I don't know. Like everybody points out those covers he did recently where it's just simple, kind of shaky line art. And what other books has he done after this? I mean,
DK3.
Xerxes.
Yeah, but that was kind of, that's Xerxes, right? I didn't even.
You could almost call it brutalist too, as far as
brutalist.
As far as that goes. I mean, I've heard that term in terms of architecture. I don't know if I've ever heard it in terms of like pen and ink art, but
I mean, have you read any of that stuff? Has any of that stuff really? See, I mean, it's almost like I don't want to say it broke him, but has he got anything left to say? I mean, like that's why I'm curious if you guys have read
wondered at times if he's simply getting so old that his body can't keep up with.
He's not that old. I know he looks like hell warmed over. You're right. He looks like the Crypt Keeper, but he's
not the years, it's the mileage.
Either way, though, the mileage would mean that he cannot keep up with the demand as an artist, and so this kind of art style gives him the excuse to make it quick and get at.
I'm sure there's some of that. I'm sure there's some of that for sure.
Unfortunately, it really takes a toll on so much of the communication of what you're trying to read on the page, though.
My argument is that actually fits in this in this particular work.
Right.
I think it fits.
Yeah.
Well, because here's the thing: you're still trying to tell a story. We have to understand what we're seeing.
Well, there's a few moments in this where
I'm not disagreeing with you, but I don't really have a problem understanding what we're seeing. So,
well, no, there is a few cases where I got totally lost. Like I could not decipher his imagery, and I chalk that up to not necessarily montage. He has lots of montage in this, but more about the abstraction of emotion. It's like it doesn't matter what exactly you're looking at. You're looking at chaos.
Yeah. Kelsey, can you bring us to one of those pages? Like I'll find it. Like one of those moments.
We'll see. I got there's one in particular. I have no idea what was happening in it, but I just had to read it as going from place to place in the destruction, the aftermath. Hold on, where is it?
Is it earlier or later?
Here it is. Okay, I got it. Let me show you.
Okay.
Present. All right. So after this whole sequence that we just went through, we catch back up with them, and they're he's telling her that he might be in love, and he's been waiting for this moment forever, and they drop down into this. This is very obvious. There's like a tunnel or something that they're dropping down, but then this happens, and I'm like, what am I looking at here? They were down on the ground. Looks like they're up in the wires and in the bird's nest of the chaos of electricity wires, and then they're down here. So is this the barbed wire? Is this the rebar and stuff of this? I was totally lost.
Those are all power lines.
Well, that's what. Yeah, but they're obviously going from the air down into the bowels of the city. So this would be out of place.
They were so high up in a building that they're going through different stuff on the outside of buildings. So
yeah, maybe. But see, that's where I just kind of like. Well, it's more about
power lines.
It's more about the atmosphere and the moment of the chaos.
And the power lines are lower than the tops of these buildings.
Mm-hmm.
It's a big. So. I have to agree with Kelsey on the fact that there were a couple moments where the gap between, because normally he follows a very cinematic sort of beat, but then there's a couple beats like the one that you just bring up there, Kelsey, where it's like that's almost like a whole scene shift, and it feels jarring because it breaks the rhythm of what we've been normally seeing. And that's, some people have pointed out as a criticism, and this is one of the criticisms that are fair, is that his pacing as he does this seems to break rhythm at times. He kind of establishes a rhythm and then he breaks it, and that's I think that's.
Well, what kind of did that is combine, and I was going to ask you guys about this, what you thought of this, but there, especially early on, he does continue it at a certain point in the book, but this repetition, where I found it a little annoying at times.
He does this in like all his books, and I hate the repetition.
Yeah, but this is like to another level.
Form.
Repetition of what?
Well, like in the early scenes. Here, let me bring that up. In the early
often a lot of dialogue. He'll just keep repeating these things over and over and over again, or break a single sentence down into. I have
to reiterate that if you go through trauma, repetition is one of the things that happens as you process trauma.
Yeah, but he was doing this long before that.
No, that's fair. But what I would say is that I completely overlook and forgive it in this work because it fits.
Like the main scene where it's, not just the kind of normal usage where he did it at the beginning, like he does in the past, like you're talking about. There is the point where the main explosion happens, or where was it? Was it the statue?
Like even before there is an attack, they were doing it with her.
Well, that's what I mean. That's more like
on the top of the building.
But see, that's what I'm saying. That's more like what you're kind of referring to, honestly, about that's kind of typical Frank Miller repetition, maybe done a little more. But there is like a moment when there's about to be an explosion and he just repeats the same thing for page after page after page. I'm trying to find it. Where he's, oh man, where is it?
I know there's a lot about when they get hit with the nails. They talk a lot about the nails, and there's a bit of,
maybe that's what it was. But it's like, it's like this. Oh, here it is. Is this it? No, no. Oh, I don't know.
Well,
I'll find it.
So to kind of bring things to a couple other things to mention. There's one character we have not talked that much about that we do need.
That's all. My bad. Yeah, he's like just a slow night. That's all. That's all. That's all. That's all. That's all. That's all. Boom, and then the nails. I mean, it's just it didn't jive with me. I'm like, what? And then later, no warning at all.
Believe it or not, I've actually seen it even worse. But
like what?
And I don't know. Maybe I did not find that irritating in the slightest, because you're dealing with in that scene anyway. What you're dealing with is your two people that are making excuses for breaking their personal rules about intimacy, and like that's like, yeah. So
that's an interesting take. Yeah, they're
justifying that they're about to cross lines in this whole business, and so they're like, demeaning and minimizing this entire intimate moment to give them an excuse to have it, and then it's ripped away from them by these explosions because it's not all. And then that actually sets up the stakes of their relationship later on in the story.
Frank did say that he wanted Frank said that he wanted this romance to be an important part of the work because he wanted to establish what we were fighting for.
Really? Because I didn't get it was hardly any part of the work.
He wanted their even if it's erotic, he wanted love, desire. He wanted that to be, because it's like, this is what he feels is worth defending. But I would argue that like the sort of like that's all. There's a lot of different ways you can interpret that. You can interpret that as kind of like an echo, essentially, and again it helps kind of punctuate a sort of beat, and then boom.
Provided you have that rhythm in your head. I mean, just as I read it just then, I added that increasing rhythm to the explosion. It's like it's a ticking clock almost. But I can imagine not reading. I didn't read it that way in the first time. I was like, what is he saying? That's all. That's
fair. I do want to bring up one other important character that gets brought up, which is the Commissioner Gordon character.
Yeah.
Because he is the character.
They're swapping out a Scottish cop for an Irish cop. Are you ready for this?
Donegal. So what's important here is that he actually ends up being our, I believe he's who we end on him. Although the story ends on his character. So it's important to mention him because he's not just the Commissioner Gordon. He ends up being kind of like the point of view of the average citizen in a post 9/11 world.
So you're saying like, because I was just going to say that, but when you comment on this, but when you said that, it kind of made sense because like in the whole thing, I realized was told through our Catwoman. What is her name? In this?
Natalie Stack.
Why can we? None of us remember her gosh darn name.
Oh, because it doesn't matter. Really, but like
because she should have a code name, doesn't have a code name, and so it doesn't make sense to not remember her name.
Yeah. So like the whole thing is told through her perspective, all the way, except for these few instances where we cut away to this, to him, and then we end on her. But when you just said that as a reflection of the people in a post 9/11 world, it's like. Before this all happened, you got your costume freaks, breaking their own rules to copulate and all this stuff. And then he represents the reality of this, crashing down. And then he's left in a pile, an ineffective mess at the end. Look how thin he is. That actually makes sense. Yeah.
Well, and part of it is like, so you have this intersection of reality and fantasy, and like the Fixer and Natalie are the fantastic side of that interaction. Mm-hmm. It's like after 9/11, right? There were a ton of people that in comics that tried incorporating those elements into the mainstream books. And it was largely a mistake, I feel, because like the traumas that people were going through in their comics. I mean, like you have Galactus showing up and smashing, the part of Midtown. Well, that's already happening, right? I mean, like it's fantastic and it's fantasy and they're not real people and it's not a big deal. Because the Fantastic Four is there and they're going to fix the buildings.
When you try to merge the two, the contradictions become almost
you run into something, and that's one of the other reasons that I appreciate about Frank taking these with the original characters. But we're still left with this juxtaposition of reality and fantasy, and so Natalie and the Fixer, they're able to go on this fantastic adventure where they meet this international, Jewish spy.
Yeah,
I gotta show that just because it's wild as hell.
Yeah, it's a wild design.
David, this is David the spy,
or
the agent or whatever. And it turns out that the Fixer was when he was young, when he was first training, David found him and taught him all of the Mossadi secrets that he knew, and that's part of his training. And so the Fixer's motivation.
How do you think that would play? How do you think that character would play in current year?
Well, I don't know. I mean, there's tons of people that have rediscovered anti-Semitism like it's a new fad.
That's true. That is true.
I don't think that it would go up particularly well. And the idea that like one of the things that the conceits that Frank is playing with is the idea that those that want to destroy Israel and those that want to destroy America through those being Al Qaeda have something in common. That's a common thread, and so we have a common threat between these two forces. But that's a debate. Like, is that even a thing anymore? And that's once again, like I say that when I talk about 9/11 being memory hold, that's part of what I'm talking about. Is that there are still people in the world that look at America and Israel as the big and little Satan, that still have it on their official charters that we need to be wiped out eventually, and that are enacting plans to make that happen. So it's like one of those things where that's still going on today. But people
in this work, I don't see any real difference between the methods of retaliation, or I mean, he was trained to do this. He'd been waiting for this moment. It was almost a self-fulfilling prophecy. He and his methods are equally as harsh as the measures that were leveled on them. What?
It was such a weird throwaway line, though. They just like toss it in there at the last second, and it's not
what I'm getting at is like the real thing is like these two are they're no different. There's no difference in any of these costumed villains and heroes. The real tragedy is that cop at the end.
Right. Yeah. Well, and that's part of what I was wanting to get at too there.
Normal
that's one of the things that is really interesting too, is that Natalie says, well, what if you're expecting this just because David told you to expect it, and it's not like it's a rational opinion, and the fixer says, well, maybe that's true, right? And so he's saying maybe that's just the way it is.
He's aware. Yeah, there's some stuff. Speaking of self-awareness,
but then at the same time, right, there really is a nerve bomb that somebody planted in the basement, in the sub basement of the subway system in under New York or whatever, Empire City, and they really
genuine WMD, and they turn it on. They hoist the enemy on their own petard, as it were. But I want to kind of since we're talking about, I think we can kind of start to dovetail towards the ending here. So this is the last scene of Natalie Stack's kind of narration of events, and she kind of is also faced with more uncomfortable realities here, which is the fact that she watches these terrorists die to this nerve agent. They don't just blow up in this case. So she watches them die in a grisly fashion. And this is essentially, I think, Frank Miller dialing up the id to its furthest extent. This is him doing his final cathartic purge. One thing I want to give Frank credit for is that he is exposed. Kelsey, you had mentioned this, that as an artist, Frank is showing you more of his soul than that a lot of people would keep quiet. People who have had like a violent fantasy about an enemy, and Frank is like, I'm going to show you the full extent of the violent fantasies I have had regarding Al Qaeda, but then also show you that unsettles him a bit. He's aware of the fact that this is an unsettling thing, and
the fact that his original draft was what they referred to as on fire, that he had gloves to hold it, that it was like the pure rage that he felt. This is edited.
Restrained.
This is restrained.
Yeah, fair. That's a fair point.
I can only imagine what that one was. Jeez.
Well, I mean, I don't think you really. I bet you wouldn't even have to imagine it. I mean, that's right. That's what
Pigman is.
Pigman is.
What is this Pigman?
I don't know anything about.
We're gonna do Pigman next. We're gonna do Pigman
not next. We'll do that next month. we'll do that one next month. We're gonna take a break from this propaganda for a month.
Let's get some Archie and friends in here.
There we go.
Yeah. The fellow, I can't remember his name right now. It's escaping me. But the fellow who did that was a Albanian Muslim, and he
Boss
Foston. And he left Islam because of 9/11.
He's a big friend of Comicsgate. He actually posts about it on a semi-regular basis. So. He's in that circle of things, slightly on the fringe there, but
on the fringe. Yeah, he's known several of the people for a long time. But Anyway, Faustin. Yeah.
So take it back to here. So I think that Miller is cognizant. He's aware of the fact this is dark. He's pushing it to about its fullest extent. But I also think he's recognizing the crisis of a lot of things in those final moments. He said the superhero, the fixer, Batman, is bleeding out from his wounds. And I pray that they don't expose him to the poison. Come on, big man. Let's get you up to where the air is clear. Thanks to you. Come on. You can make it. You have to make it. And I think that symbolically, this is a really interesting place to end, because I think he's talking to himself about, he's pep talking himself. I also think he's pep talking, the country a little bit, but I also think he's pep talking the American superhero as an institution. It has been wounded by.
That's a good point.
It was given an almost death blow by 9/11. There's a quote by Bradford Wright, who's quoting someone else, who says that after 9/11, saying it's a bird, it's a plane, it's Superman, he said,
right.
Can we say that anymore? Can we say it's a bird, it's a plane, and have the same aspirational moment and not have a moment of terror of it's a plane, oh my gosh? So
I was gonna ask you guys about that, because what Matt was saying about Galactus coming in and smashing up Times Square, and I was thinking about that in regards to this work and a 9/11, and like, and then the final image of this book being another self-insert for Frank. I mean, the Frank is not just the crazy guy going around killing terrorists. This is also a self-insert for Frank. Is he gonna survive all this? Is he gonna grow? Or move beyond it. And I was thinking about what Matt was saying and that and this, and I'm like, and what you just said, it's no wonder that superheroes are kind of going away. Maybe that's as a product of that kind of thought. Can we do that kind of earnestness, that boyish, silliness anymore? Because it does seem ridiculous, either not addressing the reality of the situation of Galactus smashing Times Square like this book would, like trying to process real trauma, or can we just let it go and enjoy like the adventure of it and the fun like we used to,
I think, and so here's part of the trade-off on that is, I think we have to, right? I think that we need comics that deal with these kind of heavy issues in reality, and I like in Marvel's where they were talking about flooding the city, and people were talking about, oh my goodness, people were trapped in the subway tunnels when this happened, and are they okay? And all this kind of stuff. I think that that's important to have comics that have real weight to them. But I think it's important to have comics that are also, don't.
Yeah, exactly.
Because the fact of the matter is that regardless of what comics that show us that terror and horror can happen, remind us of the stakes.
Yeah,
but comics that show.
I don't want to read that all the time.
Right, but comics that show
to be remembered.
Comics that show the fake version, the idealized version, the Superman aspirational version, those are important because they show that we can survive, and we have to survive. And that's one of the things about this work, because this is a catharsis, right? We've got the superhero adventure where the fixer may be crazy, but he's actually he's at least in part justified because he stops them from unleashing this horrible chemical agent on the
necessary
world.
Evil, if
right? It's necessary evil, but it's still a fantasy adventure. Right?
Can we have Schwarzenegger blowing guys away with a machine gun?
Right. What we never that's what I'm trying to get at is we never see what happens to the fixer after that scene. Does he survive? Does he not? We don't see, because that actually doesn't matter as much for this story. What matters for this story is that the very human character, the very human guy, that he's got to deal with the life. He's got to wake up and put his life back together and deal with the fact that tomorrow's going to happen anyway. And so we don't find out, does Fixer survive? Do Fixer and Natalie live happily ever after and have 14 kids? Right? We never have a clue of that, and it doesn't matter because that part of the fantasy is over. The part of the reality has to pick up again. Now, this isn't, and I think that's necessary for this comic. But as a genre, right? As superheroes, as a genre, we need to have stories that have heavy consequences. But we also need stories with Superman and his every imagined superpower of the week, right? Where Superman
landscaping,
right? Where Superman can blink 3 times and wink the right way.
That's a real power of his, by the way. Right. That was the joke for Cartoonicus, because that's an inside joke we have.
Yeah. So, but whatever it is, right? Or where Superman, spins around 3 times and clicks his heels and repairs the bridge. He knows the magic bridge. He learned the magic bridge fixing dance when he was stranded in Neverland, or whatever it is, right?
Or Batman's got bridge fixing spray in his
right. We need those stories too, because those also tell us the story that we have to survive whatever it is, and we can figure it out, even if it's imaginary and silly. We have to know that there's a tomorrow.
I was thinking about this actually earlier today on Graybeards, when we were talking about somehow we got to talking about Total Recall, and I was thinking how I used to love that movie and how just gratuitous the violence was, and like when they on the escalator scene where they grab that guy and he gets used as a human shield and just gets obliterated. And suddenly I had this thought. I was like, that guy was coming back from visiting friends in another state, and he was about to get home. He's taken 2 trains and a bus, and he was just about home to, see his girlfriend for the first time in like a month, and he gets obliterated, used as a human shield. I thought about that guy today.
An NPC.
Yeah, and it just, in the context of the scene in the moment, it didn't matter.
Kelsey, your question made me think, and for the first time, I think you came up for a good reason for DC's move to Burbank, because when you ask, can we do superheroes? Can we still do it? Can the genre survive? The first gut instinct I had was yes, but not in New York, because superheroes have been so united to the image of New York, on a psychological, mythological level, and I think that the blow dealt there needs some healing. I feel because people like Reese, who've been in the Midwest for a very long time, are able to access aspirational parts of the superhero because they weren't affected by the trauma in the same way. But if you're writing in downtown New York and you have an explosion happen in downtown New York, it's suddenly populated by more. There's just more to it than that. You blew up something in New York? Are you insane? There's just
Man,
certain...
I see stuff like that in media pops up every now and then, or old media where they have planes crashing into the tower and things like that. It immediately brings up those images in my head, and I immediately lose context of the story that I'm being told and get lost in my head. It's impossible to let go of it.
Forever, I was bemoaning, I can't believe DC moved to Burbank. And then just your comment made me go, you know what? That might be necessary to rehabilitate the superhero, is to move him to places where he can grow and
make him gay.
I could really get behind your theory if DC Comics hadn't, been sucking for 20 years.
Well, Dawn of DC Superman's doing okay.
Yeah, that one book is
one comic. Yeah.
Well,
actually, we do need
not fair, because Vin Didi, I've really enjoyed his Hawkman. His Sandman was just.
But it's an interesting because at the end of the day, what you're saying, Kelsey, I think it has a geographic, and that's an important thing that I think we sometimes miss when we analyze something like Holy Terror. This is a regional geographic work. And I think that some of the criticism has come from people who don't have or don't appreciate those roots. When I was putting Linkara on blast, I was like, dude, talk to someone from New York.
Well, I've seen media that explores the other side, and it really, like when there's someone, I can't remember what movie it was, but it was someone having a wedding in the Middle East, and their entire wedding party and building just gets exploded by some nameless drone. and that sends that person that survived into a tailspin of anger and fury, like this guy. And it starts a whole path. So it works the same on both sides, and it's equally as horrifying, when you're someone caught in the middle of all this, but yeah, I mean,
there's a regional geography matters here. And I think that's an important thing to think about. And geography matters for the superhero as a genre. There's a reason why it is a story often of the city, and specifically of New York, the city.
Well, that's what it's born too. It was born there. The superhero. Well, except Superman. What
was Cleveland actually? But
yeah, what was Cleveland? What was that?
The original Superman stories from the Golden Age were set in Cleveland before they moved to Metropolis. But even then,
well, the Heartland when he was a kid, was that the way it was then, or was that also Cleveland? Like in the
it was supposed to be outside, like in the sticks outside of the big city. So. If they imagined Cleveland with the original Superman stories, then you're looking at rural Ohio.
But even then, when they were imagining this, they were still looking towards the city. They may have been Cleveland boys, but they were looking towards the city as what Superman's stomping grounds were. So either way, you end up in the same. Basically, it ends up in New York very quickly. So it's that's like I said. It's this is a work that is bleeding New York essentially, and the statue, because the Twin Towers don't fall in Holy Terror, but basically a statue that looks basically just like the Statue of Liberty does.
They've got a statue of Justicia.
Yeah,
right. Yeah,
Blind
Lady Justice.
Another landmark of New York essentially, that they tear down for the story.
Yeah, but also the fact that it's the goddess of justice, I'm assuming that is also metaphorical.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah.
It affects the Fixer so much is that he's like, well, that's it. Justice is dead.
He's gonna avenge it. Yeah. No, that's totally valid. Good point. Do we you want to do wrap up on final thoughts here? I think we were at a good point to.
Yeah. Start. No, I think that's really good. Kelsey, you're the guest. You the main guest, I guess. Do you want to go first with your final thoughts on the work?
Yeah, as a piece of art, I wanted that nice, neat wrap up, and I understand now that things in reality aren't nice and neat, and there is no closure to any of this. We're still grappling with these things today, so I can understand that kind of ending. But like we were talking about having the reality versus the fantasy of it, I still very much prefer the fantasy of it, where you can get that catharsis and live out, even if it is a revenge fantasy against, representations of terrorism in whatever form it is, or villainy, in a normal superhero comic. It's just when it's this pointed, it's so intense, and I found it fascinating, kind of getting a look at the pain of an artist, and that's always really neat when somebody can bare their soul in a completely honest way. And I often wonder, am I capable of such a thing? And I don't know that I could bear myself as raw as Frank Miller does here, because now you see the results of it, and what he's having to, deal with, just all these different interpretations of what he meant, or what he was feeling and whatnot. And it's so much not about that. It's just pure emotion put on page, and you can see it in every line. So I found it fascinating. I found it confusing, thought-provoking, raw. It needed to, we could say it needed more iterations to try to fine-tune it into whatever, but I don't know. I like it for what it is. I hate it for what it is. But it cannot be denied.
Yeah.
It's a fascinating work. So
Do you think? So my follow-up question would be: do you think it deserves the excoriation it gets? Like this, because this book.
No, I found it rather tame, to be honest with you. I think
wow.
there was one character that expressed legitimate racism. The two main characters do not. They don't even. I don't even think they say the word Islam at all. I think that's poorly misrepresented in the criticism of it. And that was one character that no one liked. I think this is an indictment of systems of all kinds, and not one religion. And it certainly isn't racist, because that isn't a race. But it is very violent. It is very pointed to the thing that damaged him personally, I guess. And this is his way of getting through it. So I don't think it deserves what it gets. I mean, I've read far worse material that doesn't get nearly this level of hate. And that's because it is from Frank Miller and not Mike Diana or somebody like that, or
well, I mean,
Tim
I think I'm with you on that 100%. I think that there are a lot of R. Crumb that is more offensive.
Right.
Gosh, yes.
And
there's old pie cartoons that are more offensive.
Yeah, and I don't even mean in terms of like racially or anything. It's just one of those things where, like, this is it's angry and it's bitter, and maybe somebody could say it's not well enough informed.
What do you? Because some people will say it's either the worst thing they've ever read, or they'll say it's the worst Frank Miller comic they've ever read.
Yeah, and that's I don't know. That's nonsense. It's good comics.
I don't know. I've read worse. He's done a lot of stuff. I mean, I've read stuff that I didn't like near. I mean, I don't know that I like or dislike this work. I don't know that I include this in the pantheon of things that I enjoy about Frank Miller. To me, this is set aside. This is not really part of his oeuvre. I mean, this is just him exercising demons. But I mean, how can you compare this to Dark Knight or Daredevil? I mean, they're just different animals entirely. So yeah.
Okay. I'll go next. I guess I am fascinated by this work from a structural standpoint, seeing how he's wielding the tools of comics to communicate and how deft he is with the techniques at times is amazing. And I feel like the fact that he can wield confusion as a tool, I think that there's personally, if I put on my more critical objective hat, I would say that I think he walks the line and even stumbles over it. Because even if you're wielding confusion as an artistic concept, there's a line you can cross where it becomes too confusing, and then the work kind of devolves into meaninglessness. I think he is walking that line a good chunk of the comic. That's why I think it took me 3 times to kind of really get it. And I think that you can point that out as a weakness, and I think I would have to concede that point. I think this work gets entirely unfairly judged. I think the critical conversation regarding it is so focused on the wrong things. They're just focused on the ideological disagreements they have or they perceive with Frank, that they miss the fact that this is actually a very deeply artistic, symbolic, and fascinating piece, and that wields some structural things that are at the height, I think, the pinnacle of comics. That double page spread with the blank panels and the lead up to it, and just what is the things that are working on several levels there. That's brilliant stuff. I personally don't think that's a debatable point. That being said, it is kind of weird to judge this comic because on the one hand, this is the best of comics. It's like Dickens, right? It's the best of comics. It's the worst of comics.
Yeah.
It's weird because to say it's like, well, it's kind of crappy story. The plot is really rudimentary. Like there's so many criticisms if you're going to dial into those things.
Mm-hmm.
But at the end of the day, what he's doing that he does well is so amazing. It's a hard one to judge. I do agree. But I would say to not just listen to, because I've seen people who say, oh, I just heard that was the worst thing ever, so I didn't check it out myself. Check this one out yourself. Judge it for what it is. Come to your own conclusions about it, and walk in with an open mind regarding the structure of it to see what he is artistically doing, and then come to your own conclusion on it. And you still might hate it at the end.
Do that you read a whole lot of other Miller comics first and build yourself.
You might hate this and then go back and realize, oh, I like this stuff way better.
Yeah. What about you, Cartoonicus? What were your closing?
So I'm still roughly in the same spot I was in the beginning. There are a million things I could say negative about this, and every time I went to open my mouth, I just backed off because I don't want to deal with the consequences. I say that simply to point out that this is one of the most annoying comics I've ever known, because there is so much I could say that I really absolutely hate about it, from the writing perspective, from the artwork, etc., etc. And yet at the same time, it seems every complaint leveled against it from anybody else is, and I can always completely disagree with everyone else's reasons for hating it. So it's like Kritless said, it's the best, it's the worst. I'm simultaneously defending it while attacking it, and it's just the most chaotic thing.
Isn't that the saying? Be the best or be the worst. Just don't be boring. No.
This is not boring. It's not boring.
Is not boring. And it will encourage debate probably from here to eternity.
Yeah, boring is the worst thing you can be.
So,
Metal, are you inspired to read it?
You didn't. Yeah, there you go.
No, this actually has been on my list of things. I really like Miller's work. I'm not fond of the effect that he's had on Batman after him, but taking his stuff and considering like an Elseworld stuff, I still like his Batman stuff a lot. I think he's a good storyteller, so I pretty much always enjoy when I read his work. I just didn't think I was going to be on the panel tonight and didn't have a lot of time, so I didn't invest it into reading this book. But I probably will. Though at this point, I'm more excited for us to read some Archie, maybe Pals and Gals number 23.
The palette cleanser.
Just as long as it's not Life with Archie.
Like Archie. No, I want Pals and Gals number 23, which is the first appearance of Josie and the Pussycats.
Yeah, my man. I can get down with that.
Okay, so I think we got next week's show figured out.
My favorite Archie comic.
We hadn't decided. No, we'll just do just that one. Just
that one.
I was only saying Archie is a very interesting topic, though, because of how he came to be.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
So anyhow, my final thoughts. When I first read it, I was very conflicted about the ending. Because I like you say, Kelsey, I want to wrap it up. I want to imagine the scene after the last scene in Shane, right? Where Shane gets right past that horizon and there's another little town where there's a cute blonde that he can settle down with and make a life, right? An uncomplicated, happy life to live out the rest of his days. Just one town over, everything's cheery and sunshine. I like that kind of a story. You don't get that here, but the more it sat with me through the weekend, because I read this last week, and the more and more it sat with me, the more I'm like, no, that ending is exactly what it needed to be because of what the story is. Because you've got this fantasy, you've got the reality, and you've got the life the day after, and this is exactly the ending it needed to have, and I really enjoy the unsettled ending when it fits the story just right. That last scene in Chinatown, right? And and that was what we have here. And I just really liked it.
Well, and the ambiguous open ending before this shot,
yes,
leaves you open to have that idea that they did go off into a new little town and had their ideal life together outside of all this terror, and but that you can imagine that.
Yeah.
But that last little shot of that guy, of our detective, it kind of always pulls that back just a little bit, where
and it deals with the fact that the greater burden of this type of story is not the escapist, it's the realist aspects of it. And that's why so I on balance I really liked it. This is not going to be one of those things I'm going to go back and revisit every year. Definitely, but it's like Seven. I'm really glad I watched it. So that's kind of my take on it.
I have to admit that I have a personal stake in it because it really fits in with a project I'm working on. It just fits so much of it. So I keep finding myself revisiting aspects of it. So I will definitely revisit this sucker.
Oh yeah. This is a good fit for your thing, definitely. So anyhow, that's the show. Next week we're having I guess we're reading Archie.
A nice sorbet palate cleanser. Just, oh, that's nice and bland. Oh, how delicious!
It'll be great. And then so that'll be next week's show. And until next time, and you find out who happens to be on the panel. Who knows? Maybe Donal will show up for Archie. No, I'm
hoping we can have
I hope everything's cool.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I hope everything's going well for him. I hope we can get some of his thoughts, because I remember him saying, Kelsey, if you want to briefly summarize, didn't you say Donal had tapped into the raw energy aspect of it to some?
Yeah, I was curious about that because I think he was tweeting about it, about reading it and really getting into it. He liked it, and I was curious about what his takes were from it. Because he's not someone that strikes me as the type that would enjoy this kind of work. That's, he draws fun stuff. He's much more cartoony and stuff like that. So coming from that point of view, what this meant to someone who's, to me, inner self is full of joy and, 80s action figures smacking around, what does a guy like that take out of this work? I know he's jamming big time on what Twitless was talking about, the artistic expression of the comic medium that was achieved in this book is superb, and it probably got his juices flowing, for how to visually interpret story in unique and new ways. And that's what I was hoping to get from Donal, what he was getting out of it, beyond just the cultural aspects of it, the more technical side of it.
Well, I will say Donal says on Twitter that he thinks that Holy Terror is one of Frank Miller's best pieces of work. So he wants that was his. We'll have to see if we can get his unpack those thoughts at a future date. But that was definitely what he felt about it. So.
All right. Well, that sounds like a good place to cut off for sure. Like I said, Archie next week. It'll be weird and fun. And until next time, get out there and read some comics. And have a good week, guys.
Night.
Bye.